Hello, church. It's Pastor Ben. Hope you're all having a great week. Wow, the temperatures have been so much nicer, haven't they? It just seems like it's getting warmer, and when we're kind of approaching spring, hopefully. I don't want to say that, too loudly because I don't want winter to hear it. I've even heard that, maybe on Sundays and Mondays we might almost hit 60. That would be fantastic. If we could actually hit 60, that would be great, or even get close to it. I'll take it this time of the year, definitely. I like 70s, but in March, early March, I'll take 60s, if I have to. Um, well, not even if I have to. So, well, I don't know what it was today, if it was, all this exercise I've been getting with my physical therapy sessions or the weather, but it just seemed like I had a little extra spring in my step today, so I was glad for that. Let's go ahead and dive into our message today. This is week 3 of our Eyewitness Views series, and hey, before I dive into this series, I want to remind you next week, this is today, as I will be posting this video on March 7th. Um, I want to remind you next week, March 14th, is the beginning of daylight savings time. So make sure that you set your clocks forward, especially if you're planning on coming to church, because otherwise you're gonna be late. so, um, yeah, so make sure you're setting your clocks forward. And while I'm thinking about church activities, I do want to announce an event coming up at Heartland Church, one of our neighboring churches that we're kind of affiliated with. I wanted to just mention that they are having their auction night at the auction night, and it's a special event. It starts at 6 o'clock on Sunday the 7th. That'll be the day that I post this video, so if you happen to be watching it, take note of that if you're interested. There's a special thing where you can dress like the decade you were born if you want to, special trends and fads and whatever happened to be going on when you were born. You don't have to do that. I don't plan on doing that because for me, clothing gets a little expensive, and I'm not going to buy some clothes that I'm never going to wear again. So, early 80s clothing is just not for me. So, yeah. Um, so yeah, if you want to attend that, there's a lot of not so much objects being sold, but services being sold. So you can check those out on the Facebook page, Heartland's Facebook page, see what's on there, and if there's anything you're interested in, you can come and bid on it. Heartland is trying to raise money to renovate their sound system, so which is needed, for a modern church. As far as a church with a band and things, the sound system's about 20 years old, and it's just not doing what it needs to do anymore. And also, it's some of the parts are aging, and they don't work quite as well as they used to either. So. Anyway, yes, we are in week 3 of our Eyewitness Views series, and starting in Luke 22, verse 44, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was as it were drops of blood falling down to the ground, great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And being in week 3, I've mentioned in the last couple of weeks that if I had a time machine, and if I could go back in time and see some of these biblical events play out, what places would I want to see? What events would I want to see? What people would I want to meet? Today, my friends, I can honestly say I probably do not want to see this particular event. This is not by far the most, would be not the most, by far the most difficult thing to watch in the Bible, but, it's, there's certainly more difficult things coming later, but this would be hard to see. It would be hard to see Jesus getting arrested and his disciples deserting him. I mean, I I don't know how I would respond if I was witnessing that event. I feel like part of me would want to try to prevent it, but because it's Jesus, he's my king. I don't know, but obviously I don't have a time machine. But what I'm saying is I just don't know if this would be very difficult to watch. So. Um, Jesus is going to the place of his betrayal, and the human part of him is in great agony. He's just suffering in his spirit, and his disciples still don't realize what is about to happen. They're probably like, "What's got Jesus down so much?" And at this time, I want to give you three notes about Jesus, as well as three notes about the disciples, and three things about how we can be changed by it. So I've already told you basically how long this sermon is going to be. You're going to be, you're really ahead of the game already. So um, first of all, before I jump into the message, let me start with this. And now what I'm saying here, it's not what you think. So if this bothers you, hang in there. Don't get rid of me, because I'm actually going to make it clear later on as I wind up this message what I actually mean. So, because Jesus drank, we can drink. Now, again, this doesn't mean what you probably think it means right now. So, like I said, if this bothers you, hang in there. Don't disconnect from me. Don't shut me down, because it's YouTube, and I know you can do that. So just hang in there with me, and you'll see what I mean by that at the end of the message. So first of all, let's start out with three notes about Jesus. Number one is during this time he sought prayer, and this wasn't just during this time. This was a constant, actually. Jesus constantly seeks prayer. It says here in Matthew 26, then Jesus went with them, his disciples, to the olive grove called Gethsemane. For some reason, I just can't say that today. Gethsemane, there we go. That's about as close as I'm going to get. And he said, sit here while I go over there to pray. And he had taken his large group of disciples with him, and then he took his closest three on with him further, and he told them, sit here while I go on to pray. Now, Jesus needed to pray at this moment. He needed to seek prayer, and as I said, it's not a new experience. Jesus frequently withdrew to pray. He also prayed with his disciples, and at times prayed in public, but he sought prayer many times in this garden, and this time he took his disciples with him. See, knowing what was going to happen, Jesus knew this. He seeks prayer, and the human part of him is at the end of his rope. He's saying, he's going to say to God, please, take this from me. I can't bear it. But he's sought prayer because of what he knows is coming, and he's seeking prayer to prepare for this moment. Well, my friends, we all know that preparation is something that sometimes we humans excel at times. If you're a farmer, you know that if you're going to plant a crop, you know that there's some work you have to do before you do that, right? You can't just show up on what day ever you decide to go out there and plant your crops and go do it. You gotta order your seed. You gotta prepare the fields, and you gotta make sure all your equipment's working before that day, and gas up everything. And there's probably a few other steps that I may be leaving out as well because I'm not a farmer, but there's a lot of work to be done. And with anything big like that, maybe it's studying for a test. You got to prepare to take that test. Or I know that I would have benefited if I would have studied more the first time I tried to take my driver's test to get my learner's permit. I failed that the first time because I thought, oh, this stuff is all common sense, easy stuff, and I didn't pass the first time. Dang it. So I passed the next time, although it was quite a while before I went and tried again. So, but Jesus knows that a big thing is coming, so he seeks prayer. Big things, they take preparation, and Jesus seeks prayer just as he done many other times. I wonder about this sometimes. Do we seek prayer like we would prepare for maybe planting day out in the fields or something big in our lives? Do we seek prayer like that? I mean, when something big is coming, is it something that do we seek prayer about that, or do we even seek prayer about the little things in our lives as often as we should? I know I sometimes struggle in that area. So number one, he sought prayer, and number two, his cup was a cup of suffering. He says to James and John, you see, James and John had been talking, and all the disciples have been talking, but James and John send their mom to talk to Jesus. To say, basically their mom says, could you make sure that one of my sons is, on your left or on your right, in a place of glory when you establish your new kingdom, and Jesus talks to James and John. He says, you do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from this bitter cup of suffering that I am about to drink? That's in Matthew 20. And in Matthew 26, while Jesus is praying, he says, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. Jesus is seeking prayer because the human part of him is afraid, even, I would say, probably, and tired and weary and sad. He doesn't want to experience what he's about to go through, and he knows he has the disadvantage of knowing exactly what's going to happen in this case. And I think all of us, if we could avoid pain, I think we would choose to do so and want to do so. It's certainly understandable. And Jesus is seeking prayer not only because he wants to avoid this, the human part of him wants to avoid this, but also because he's saying, God, I surrender to you, but I need help. You see, James and John, they wanted to be in the place of glory by Jesus' side. They didn't know what was actually about to happen. They still thought that Jesus was going to be some sort of earthly conqueror and set up a kingdom on earth, but Jesus knew what was coming. He tells them, I'm about to suffer for you. Later on you will suffer, but it won't be the same suffering. And he asks the Father, if it is possible, let this cup be taken from me. Yet not my will, but your will. Now, sometimes I think we forget to add this yet in our prayers, don't we? We say things like, oh God, just help me through this, or oh God, make this go away, or God, just make this better, or God, I'm worried about this, don't let me go through that, or God, I don't feel good, please let me feel better, and we never, well, I think often, I would say, we fail to say, yet not my will but your will be done, don't we? We forget that little part about surrender, which we talked about in our Lord's Prayer series, didn't we? For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Hallowed be your name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Not my will, but your will. We often forget to add that in our prayers, don't we? See, Jesus is about to bear all of the judgment, all of the punishment, and all of the separation for every sinner in the world that ever existed, that existed at that time, and that would exist in the future beyond even us. So number one, he sought prayer. Number two, he was going to drink a difficult suffering cup. And number three, God gave him strength. How does the Father answer Jesus' prayer? Well, he does not take away the cup, does he? Rather, he gives Jesus strength, and he gives Jesus peace. How can we see that? Well, he says, "Put away your sword, Peter," Jesus told him. "Those who use the sword will die by the sword. Don't you realize that I could ask my Father for thousands of angels to protect us, and he would send them instantly? But if I did, how would the scriptures be fulfilled that describe what must happen now?" Now he's telling his disciples, hey guys, I could get us out of this. I could get us out of this, but I love you too much to call on the angels. I love you too much not to go through this. I love you too much. What is going to happen must happen so that you do not have to drink the cup that I am going to drink. God gave him the strength to be at peace and to be ready for what was to come. That was the last time that Jesus ever prayed, ever asked God to take that away from him. So as we come to this point, I want to shift and talk about the disciples for a moment here too. I'm going to give you 3 notes about the disciples. Well, they really didn't handle things as well as Jesus. While Jesus was praying and receiving strength and peace, they were asleep. Yeah. Jesus knew, number one, there would be trials ahead for them. Now, there would be trials ahead. Jesus warned them, but like a lot of things at the time, they just didn't understand it. He said to Peter, "Couldn't you watch with me, even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation." He's not talking about a physical watch at this point. He's saying, watch out for the devil. Watch out for temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. That's in Matthew 26. And he says this to Peter, and James and John, who were part of his core group. They kept falling asleep. Every time Jesus would wander away, he would pray, and then he would come back and he'd find them asleep, and he woke them up, and then the third time he just finally said forget it, and just goes away again and prays, and then finally as the people arrive, he says, "Get up. Are you still sleeping? My betrayer has arrived." Now, my friends, we need to be alert, because temptation is always coming. We have to keep watch. We have to pray. Temptation is always going to come. But my friends, watch and pray so you don't fall into sin. Temptation, my friends, is not sin. Remember that. Jesus was led off into the desert for 40 days after he was baptized by John to be tempted by the devil, but he never gave in to those temptations. Everyone is tempted. But my friends, when we give in to those temptations, that is when it becomes sin. So number one about the disciples, they were going to face trials, and number two, Jesus knew that they had a continued weakness. So for one thing, they still just weren't getting it. But Jesus says in Matthew, and it's again with the Peter incident. He says, "But one of the men with Jesus pulled out his sword," that's Peter, "and struck the high priest's slave, slashing off his ear." Peter is a guy that often reacts. He acts on feelings that just suddenly pop into his mind. That's why he reacts so negatively at first when he says, "No, you're not going to wash my feet," and then Jesus says, "Well, I have to wash your feet, otherwise, blah." And then Peter, totally switches directions. "Oh, well, then not just my feet, but my head and my, and everything as well." And, and Jesus is like, "Oh, you, no." I have to imagine Jesus kind of smiling at that moment. "Peter, Peter, Peter," just kind of, "Oh, man, Peter." Peter doesn't have the strength to resist this feeling that he suddenly gets. So, he's like, "What do you think you're doing? This is Jesus." And he whack, and he doesn't have the strength to resist this at the moment, and he cuts off this guy's ear. Peter fell asleep at that moment. He wasn't watching out for temptation. He wasn't ready for that temptation. And now, my friends, the other day, someone said something to me, and what they said, it made me feel kind of minimized and belittled a little bit. And I remember thinking at that moment, I thought, hey, that's not right. And I didn't say anything about it to that person. I thought, well, I'll just keep this to myself. And I let it pass. Well, the thing is I didn't realize that thought had stuck in the back of my head during that whole conversation, and it influenced me I let that thought just sit in there. And it influenced the whole conversation for me after that. And I wound up saying something hurtful and something belittling about a dear friend of mine that wasn't there at the time. And I shouldn't have said it. Now and as it turns out, this person who had said this thing about me thought I was being mean and not respectful towards this person, and he was right. And he told that person about what I had said, and they were very hurt. And his wife had also found out about it, and she was also very hurt. My friends, I had fallen asleep at that moment. I gave in to them. I wasn't ready for that temptation, and I gave in to it. I wasn't watching. Well, it was one of those conversations where you have and you forget about 2 minutes or 3 minutes after the conversation was. At least it was for me. But I got an angry message from my friend later, and I realized that I had really messed up. I said, "I'm really sorry, man. Can we get together? Can we talk about this? Because I'm really sorry." And I wanted to make it right. I realized that I had messed up. I'd fallen asleep, and yes, I'd given into that temptation to lash out. I did it in a joking way at that moment, or maybe, I don't even know. And my friends, I had sinned against my friend. Now, was that other person right in what they said about me? No, I mean, it hurt me, but honestly, if I think back to it, I don't think that person meant to hurt me. Knowing the person as I do, I think it was innocent. It was a mistake, I guess. I don't know what to call it. Was I right in saying what I did about this other person? Absolutely not. And should that other person have told my friend what I had said about them given the situation? I think it was appropriate. And I wish that this guy's wife hadn't found out, um, because I wish that could have spared her that hurt. But now, and in that moment, as I said, I knew that I had done something wrong, and we had to get together and we had to talk about that, and we had a good discussion. It was a good discussion for both of us, and both of us came away closer, I think, as a result of it. But getting back to the disciples here, in Matthew 26, we see that all the disciples had deserted him and fled, and it wasn't just Peter. All the disciples had the same failing. They all fled. And the third thing that we can see about the disciples today is that Jesus prayed for them. Even though the disciples didn't get it, even though Jesus knew that as he was praying they were going to flee, he prays for them. And this verse is only found in John that I'm about to read. It's John 17:13 through 19. And I believe the reason that we only see this in John at this point is because Jesus had withdrawn with a group of his three, and they were still. Jesus was alone, but I actually believe John overheard Jesus pray this, and Matthew and Mark, who wrote the other two Gospels that were his disciples, weren't nearby, so they didn't hear this, and Luke was not actually a disciple, so obviously he didn't hear this, but this account of this prayer is only in John, and Jesus says, "Now I am coming to you. I told them many things while I was with them in this world, so that they would be filled with my joy. I have given them your word, and the world hates them because they do not belong to this world, just as I do not belong to the world. I am not asking you to take them out of the world, but to keep them safe from the evil one. They do not belong to this world any more than I do. Make them holy by your truth. Teach them your word, which is truth. Just as you sent me into the world, I am sending them into the world, and I give myself as a holy sacrifice for them, so that they can be made holy by your truth." John must have been awake for part of that, and I don't think, obviously, John didn't realize what Jesus meant by that at the time, but looking back, he could see how important this was, and he wrote it down. So as we move on to the final section, I want to give you 3 notes about us today, I should say. And the first one is that God sometimes answers our prayers with no. Why do we know this? Well, because the soldiers showed up, their commanding officer, the Romans as well, the temple guards, they all arrested Jesus, tied him up, and took him away. Jesus asked the Father, he said, "Can you take this cup from me?" And the Father said, "No, that is not my plan. But I will give you strength, and I will give you peace to get through this." Do you imagine how difficult it must have been for the father to say no to his own son? And he did that for us. I want to I even want to throw this the other way. Can you imagine if God said yes to every prayer? I mean, can you imagine if God was like our sugar daddy, so to speak, or whatever you want to call it, and whatever we ask God for something, He's like, sure, here you go. Oh, how messed up the world would be. I mean, they made a movie that was kind of like that. It was called Bruce Almighty. I don't know if you've seen it. Actually, it starred Jim Carrey, who played a guy who was a news reporter who was a little down on his luck. His career wasn't going like he wanted, and he was very unhappy. And he criticizes God and how he's doing his job and such. And Morgan Freeman pops in, who's playing God, and says, do you think you can do a better job than me? Here you go. You're God. Good luck. And he kind of he gives this character, this Bruce character, all of his power. And at first Bruce uses all of these powers for selfish reasons. He's playing around, looking at things he shouldn't. He manipulates the situation to create a romantic mood for his girlfriend, and even manipulates her a little bit, uh, messing with her mind, and he uses it to advance his career, and creating incidents, his big news stories, and all kinds of things. And he even, I guess one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when he's fooling around. He's in this diner and he looks down at this cup of tomato soup he has, and he gets this look on his face. He sticks his hands out like this, and he's like, and the soup starts parting in the middle, like it's the Red Sea, and you know. And Morgan Freeman, God pops in, right in the middle of that, says having fun, and there's papers and things flying everywhere. It was an interesting movie, but after a while during the movie, it's definitely not PG. I'll say that. There's a more appropriate version, more of a family version called Evan Almighty, which is a sequel to this that happens after that. It kind of might be more for families. But anyway, what happens in this Bruce Almighty movie is eventually this Bruce guy starts hearing these voices, and they start getting louder and louder, and God tells him that those are the prayers of people, and if you ignore them for a while, they start getting louder. And so he sets up this, like it's like a computer, and prayers are coming in like emails, and he's got an insane number, so he opens one and he responds, and then the number of prayers that he hasn't read gets bigger, and so he's like, okay, and he gets on the computer, and making a bunch of noise, and we're going really fast, and then he's like, all right, and then the number of prayers goes shooting upwards, and he's like, come on, and finally he gets frustrated and says, all right, reply to all. He sends a reply to every prayer, and it's an auto reply, yes, to every prayer. Well, the world just goes into chaos. A whole bunch of people win the lottery all at once, which means they get nothing because they're supposed to split the prize. So, and who's going to win a game? Well, I mean, how do you decide who wins a game when both fans are praying for their team to win, and you answer both prayers yes? It's like all kinds of imagine if somebody prays for rain and somebody prays for sun, and what happens when both prayers are yes. And so the world just goes nuts. Everything just gets horribly bad and starts falling apart. And that's why God, in part, doesn't always answer our prayers in the way we would prefer. I mean, I can't think of a better way to show that. I'm sure God could, obviously, but you know, the world would be in chaos, and our lives would be in chaos if God answered all of our prayers in the way that we wanted Him to. And sometimes we pray for things that are not in our best interests. I mean, sometimes maybe even we pray for things that are actually, things that would hurt God without realizing it. Things that are hurtful to God for us to pray for without even realizing it. Um, God's will is not always our will. God is always seeing a bigger picture that we do not see. My friends, sometimes God's answer to our prayers is no. And secondly, even if He answers our prayers no, He is always going to give us something. He's always going to give us strength. And He always offers us peace in the midst of a storm. You see, Jesus says in John 17, He says, I am praying not only for these disciples, but also for all those who will ever believe in me through their message. That's us, my God. That's us, guys. Jesus is praying for us. Even us, because we are those who came to believe through their message. Jesus, at the moment when He's about to be arrested, at the time when He is going to face unimaginable suffering and death on a cross, He takes the time to pray not only for His disciples, but for us too. I pray that they will all be one, just as you and I are one. As you are in me, Father, I am in you, and may they be in us, so that the world will believe that you sent me. And finally, my friends, our cup is the cup of salvation. I said earlier that Jesus drank so we can drink. I wasn't talking about alcohol. I wasn't talking about any of those types of substances. And whether or not people can actually drink should actually drink is a matter of debate according to different denominations, and different people. But what I mean by this is that, you see, Jesus took the cup of suffering, the cup of judgment, the cup of wrath, and the cup of separation. That was meant for us, the cup that was something that we should all have had to drink out of. And He drank that cup Himself, so that we would get a different cup. We would get the cup of salvation. Psalm 116:13 says, I will lift the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord, because Jesus did this for us. We can call on His name. My friends, Jesus took the cup that was meant for us. He took that wrath. He took that judgment. He took that punishment, that separation, and endured it for you, that bitter cup of suffering. That was meant for me. That was meant for you. It was meant for us. Jesus paid the price for every wrong thing that we ever did, including the one I mentioned earlier. was another thing that Jesus had to pay for. Sometimes I wish I wouldn't stumble so much. My friends, because of Jesus, we are given the cup of salvation, and that is a wonderful gift. Let us pray. Father, you are so good. I can't imagine what it must have felt like to say no to your Son so that you could say yes to us. Jesus, I don't even want to think about, well, I can't imagine the amount of suffering you went through. I can't imagine how you must have been feeling that night in the garden. Thank you for what you did for us. You are Lord and Master. Help us to walk in a way that we don't stumble so much. Thank you for the cup that you gave us, the cup of salvation. Thank you for the privilege of being able to call on you. Be with us, Lord, as we go from this place. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Well, my friends, we will be continuing this series next week. Don't forget to set your clocks ahead, especially if you have to be somewhere on Sunday morning or Sunday in general. I once had a friend who actually was late to work on Monday because she had not set her clocks ahead on Sunday and was wound up going all the way past into Monday before she realized that time had changed. Wow. But don't be late. Don't forget to set your clocks ahead. And have a great week. Enjoy some of the warmer weather that we're going to have. Be blessed. Bye-bye.